March 1943. The Atlantic was a graveyard. Every 72 hours, another American convoy disappeared beneath the waves. U-boats prowled unseen, unstoppable. Admiral King's war room in Washington, D.C. displayed the brutal truth. Detection equipment failed 89% of the time. Then a 19-year-old from Nebraska walked into a Philadelphia shipyard with a coffee can full of fence wire and a sketch on a napkin. Navy engineers laughed. 60 days later, 40 German submarines would never surface again. February 14, 1943, so 3:47 hours, Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, Pennsylvania. The smell hit Lieutenant Commander James Harrigan before the sight did. Salt water mixed with diesel fuel, the chemical stench of burning electrical insulation, and something worse. Human fear had its own odor in the pre-dawn darkness of Pier 12. The destroyer escort USS Eldridge sat low in the water, listing 7 degrees to port, her hull torn open by a torpedo that should never have reached her. 43 men, sir, the damage control officer reported, his voice flat with exhaustion. Survivors pulled 18 from the water. The rest went down with the forward compartment. Harrigan said nothing. There was nothing to say. This was the 3rd escort vessel limping back to Philadelphia in 2 weeks, each one carrying the same impossible story. The German U-boats were hunting American convoys with near-perfect accuracy, striking from positions that sonar couldn't detect, vanishing before depth charges could reach them. The magnetic anomaly detectors failed. The acoustic listening arrays picked up nothing but ocean noise. The primitive radar sets couldn't penetrate water. The mathematics of the Battle of the Atlantic had become a death sentence. German submarine production had accelerated to 17 boats per month. American merchant ship losses had climbed to 650,000 tons in January alone. At current rates, the statisticians at the Naval War College calculated complete strategic failure within 8 months. Britain would starve. The invasion of Europe would become impossible. The war would be lost not through military defeat, but through logistical strangulation. In a corrugated metal warehouse at the far end of Pier 12, Captain Theodore Wilkins stood before a chalkboard covered in diagrams that represented 18 months of failure. Wilkins commanded the Anti-Submarine Warfare Development Unit, a designation that sounded impressive until you understood it was where the Navy sent problems it couldn't solve and officers it wanted to forget. "Gentlemen, we're dying because we're blind," Wilkins told the assembled engineers, his Annapolis ring clicking against the chalkboard as he tapped a diagram of an escort destroyer. "Our detection equipment works perfectly in laboratory conditions. In the North Atlantic in February, with 30-foot seas and storm interference, it's worthless. The Germans know this. They're exploiting it. And we have no answer." The room held 23 men, Navy engineers from MIT and Stanford, civilian contractors from General Electric and Westinghouse, acoustic specialists from Bell Labs. Combined, they represented 380 years of technical education and practical experience. Combined, they had produced exactly 0 solutions that worked when saltwater spray froze on your face and the deck pitched 40 degrees beneath your feet. "Sir, we've tested 17 modifications to the magnetic loop arrays," said Dr. Robert Chen, a physicist on loan from Caltech. "The fundamental problem is environmental interference. The ocean itself generates magnetic signatures that overwhelm our sensors. We can increase sensitivity, but that just gives us more false positives." "What about the British approaches?" Harrigan asked. "The corvettes are having some success. Different operational doctrine," interrupted Commander Paul Morrison, a submariner who'd transferred to anti-submarine warfare after losing his boat to a Japanese destroyer. "The Brits use saturation patrols with aircraft support. We don't have enough destroyers for that strategy. We need our escorts to actually find the submarines, not just deter them with presence." The door to the warehouse opened, letting in a blast of cold February air and a figure so unexpected that conversation stopped. She was perhaps 19 or 20 years old, wearing dungarees and a man's oversized peacoat, carrying a battered canvas shoulder bag and a genuine farm girl's air of practical determination. Her hands were rough with calluses, her brown hair pulled back in a simple braid, and her face had that particular weathered quality that came from years spent in fields under open sky. "I'm looking for Captain Wilkins," she said, her voice carrying the flat vowels of the Great Plains. "They told me at the gate he's the one trying to fix the submarine problem." "Miss, this is a restricted facility," Harrigan began, already moving to escort her out. "Mary Catherine Fisher," she said, not moving. "From Broken Bow, Nebraska. I worked at Radio Corporation of America in Camden before they laid off the civilian staff last month. I've been reading about your detection problem in the Philadelphia Inquirer. I think I know how to fix it." The room filled with the particular silence that comes before laughter. This wasn't the first civilian who'd appeared with miracle solutions. In the past 6 months, Wilkins had entertained presentations on everything from trained dolphins to psychic detection. All had been politely dismissed. "Miss Fisher," Wilkins said carefully, "I appreciate your patriotism, but submarine detection involves extremely complex physics." "I grew up on a cattle ranch," Mary Catherine interrupted. "My father ranched on 200 head across 8,000 acres. When you're trying to locate cattle in rough terrain at night, you don't use your eyes. You use what they can't hide." She opened her canvas bag and pulled out a coffee can. Inside was a coil of wire. Not naval specification cable, but simple galvanized farm fencing wire, the kind you'd buy at any hardware store in rural America. Wrapped around the coil was a hand-drawn schematic on the back of a paper napkin. "The problem with your magnetic detectors is you're trying to sense the hull itself," she said, laying the napkin on Wilkins's table. "But a submarine isn't just metal. It's metal moving through water. Moving metal generates eddy currents. Eddy currents generate secondary magnetic fields that are directional and consistent. You don't need to sense the submarine. You need to sense the electromagnetic wake it leaves behind." Chen leaned forward, his skepticism visibly shifting. "That's theoretically sound, but the magnitude of those fields would be infinitesimal." "Not if you use a differential detection array," Mary Catherine said. 2 wire coils positioned at specific distances. You measure not the absolute field strength, but the difference between them. The submarine's wake creates an asymmetric signature. Ocean noise is symmetric. Basic signal processing. She pulled out a second item from her bag, a breadboard circuit assembly that looked like it had been built on someone's kitchen table, with parts scavenged from a radio. "I built a prototype using components from broken radio sets. It's crude, but it demonstrates the principle. You'd need proper naval-grade components and waterproof housing, but the fundamental approach works. I've tested it detecting my father's tractor from 200 yards through a snowstorm." Morrison picked up the napkin sketch, his eyes moving across the diagram with increasing focus. "This is brilliant," he said quietly. "This is actually brilliant. The Germans wouldn't even know we're using it because it's entirely passive. No transmitted signal to detect." "How long to build a working prototype?" Wilkins asked, the question emerging before he'd fully processed the implications. "If you give me access to your machine shop and electrical components, I can have a working unit ready for bench testing in 48 hours, Mary Catherine said. "Field testing would take longer, but I can prove the concept immediately." "And if it works?" Harrigan asked. Mary Catherine's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened with the particular determination that came from growing up in a place where winter could kill you if you made mistakes. "If it works, sir, your escorts will be able to detect submarines at ranges your current equipment can't match. You'll know where they are before they know you're hunting them, and you'll be able to guide your depth charges with precision instead of hope." The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant sound of welding torches working on damaged hulls. Outside, another convoy was being assembled for the run to Britain, 47 merchant ships carrying 380,000 tons of supplies that might or might not survive the crossing. The mathematics hadn't changed. The war was still being lost in the North Atlantic, one convoy at a time. "You have your 48 hours, Wilkins said. "Morrison, you're with her. Chen, clear whatever resources she needs. Harrigan, I want the Eldridge ready for sea trials in 1 week. Sir, the Eldridge needs 3 weeks minimum for repairs. 1 week, Commander. If Miss Fisher's device works, I want it operational before the next convoy cycle. If we can prove this concept, we can retrofit the entire escort fleet within 60 days. Mary Catherine nodded once, the gesture carrying farm-bred economy of motion. "I'll need coffee," she said, "a lot of coffee. And if someone could show me where the machine shop is, we should get started. Men are dying while we talk." February 17th, 1943, 14:30 hours. Machine Shop 7, Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The machine shop operated on wartime schedules, which meant it never truly closed. Under banks of fluorescent lights that turned night into perpetual industrial day, Mary Catherine Fisher worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that each hour of delay translated to lives lost somewhere in the Atlantic. She'd been awake for 31 hours straight, sustained by Navy coffee that tasted like battery acid and determination that came from somewhere deeper than caffeine. The prototype device didn't look like revolutionary technology. It looked like exactly what it was: farm girl improvisation applied to naval warfare. 2 coils of carefully wound wire mounted on a wooden frame salvaged from packing crates, connected to a differential amplifier circuit that Mary Catherine had breadboarded using components cannibalized from damaged radio sets. The whole assembly sat on a workbench between a lathe and a drill press, surrounded by naval engineers who'd gone from skepticism to obsession in less than 12 hours. "The key is geometric precision," Mary Catherine explained for the 4th time, her voice hoarse from talking over the shop's constant noise. She was pointing at the wire coils with a screwdriver, using it like a classroom pointer. "The coils need to be exactly 2.4 meters apart and aligned within 2 degrees of true. Any variation creates asymmetric noise that swamps the signal we're trying to detect." Dr. Chen had spent the previous 6 hours running calculations on borrowed slide rules, covering page after page with equations that described electromagnetic field propagation in salt water. The theoretical detection range should be approximately 800 yards for a Type 7 U-boat traveling at 4 knots, he said, laying another sheet of calculations on the workbench. "But that assumes ideal conditions. In actual sea states, we won't know what works until we test it," Mary Catherine interrupted, not unkindly. "My father used to say you can calculate how a fence should stand, but you don't know until winter storms hit it whether you built it right." Commander Morrison had become her unlikely ally, translating between farm wisdom and naval bureaucracy. He'd spent the morning fighting through supply chains to secure proper naval-grade wire, waterproof junction boxes, and authorization to commandeer machine shop time from 3 other projects. "The challenge isn't building the prototype," he said. "The challenge is building something that can survive being mounted on a destroyer in North Atlantic conditions. Saltwater corrosion, 40-foot waves, temperatures below freezing. Then we build it stronger," Mary Catherine said simply. She turned to the machinist who'd been assigned to the project, a grizzled chief petty officer named Kowalski, who'd been building things for the Navy since before she was born. "Chief, can you fabricate a mounting frame from 1/4-inch steel plate, something that can be welded directly to the deck?" Kowalski studied her sketch with the critical eye of a man who'd seen plenty of engineers' designs fail when they met reality. "It'll add weight," he said. "Maybe 200 pounds for the full assembly. Your destroyer captains won't love that." "They'll love it more than getting torpedoed," Mary Catherine replied. "Weight we can compensate for, death we can't." By midnight on February 17th, the prototype had evolved into something that looked almost naval, a rugged steel frame holding the detection coils, with the electronics housed in a waterproof box sealed with rubber gaskets. It wasn't beautiful, but it had the practical elegance of equipment built to work rather than impress. More importantly, bench tests in the machine shop had demonstrated the principle. Using a piece of steel plate dragged past the sensors on a cart, they could detect the electromagnetic wake reliably at 20-foot ranges. "Tomorrow we mount it on the Eldridge and run harbour tests," Morrison announced at 0200 hours on February 18th. "Mary Catherine, you need to sleep. You're no good to us unconscious." She nodded, but didn't move from the workbench, where she was soldering connections on a backup circuit board. "I'll sleep when it works," she said. "My brother is on a merchant ship in the Atlantic. Every convoy that leaves without this equipment is sailing towards submarines that can kill them before they know the attack is coming." The personal stakes hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the machine shop had someone in the war: brothers, sons, husbands, friends. The casualty lists published in newspapers were abstractions until they contained names you recognized. The Battle of the Atlantic wasn't just a strategic problem, it was thousands of personal tragedies waiting to happen. Lieutenant Commander Harrigan appeared at 0400 hours, looking as exhausted as everyone else. "The Eldridge is ready," he reported. "Repairs are adequate for coastal sea trials. Captain Wilkins wants the device mounted and tested by 800. 4 hours, Chen muttered. "That's not enough time." "It's the time we have," Mary Catherine interrupted, finally setting down her soldering iron. "Let's move." The pre-dawn transfer of the prototype from machine shop to ship became an exercise in controlled chaos. The device, now officially designated Fisher Detection Array Mark Lasson in Morrison's paperwork, weighed 247 pounds and required 8 men to carry. The mounting location had been selected on the Eldridge's stern, welded directly to the deck structure, where it would be least affected by the ship's own magnetic signature. Chief Kowalski supervised the welding with the intensity of a man who understood that bad welds killed sailors. Sparks cascaded in the darkness as arc welders secured the steel frame. Mary Catherine worked alongside the electricians, running cables through waterproof conduits, connecting the detection array to monitoring equipment installed on the bridge. By 0730 hours, the installation was complete. By 0800 hours, the Eldridge was casting off from Pier 12 for initial sea trials. The Delaware River was cold and grey under overcast skies, the water choppy with whitecaps driven by northwest winds. Mary Catherine stood on the bridge next to Captain Wilkins, watching the monitoring equipment with the same focused intensity she'd bring to watching cattle in a storm. The oscilloscope screen showed the electromagnetic baseline, random noise from the ship's own systems, from the river's saltwater, from the industrial activity of the shipyard. "We need a test target," Wilkins said. "I've arranged for the submarine S-12 to make a series of passes at various depths and speeds. She's an old S-class boat, but her electromagnetic signature should be similar to a German Type 7. The radio crackled. "Bridge, sonar, contact bearing 095, range 1200 yards. Classified submarine, designated Sierra 1. Mary Catherine's hands moved across the controls of her detection array, adjusting gain and frequency response. The oscilloscope trace remained chaotic, showing nothing but noise. Her jaw tightened. In the machine shop, the system had worked perfectly. Here, with the ship's engines running and the water filled with electromagnetic contamination, it was blind. "Give it time," Morrison murmured beside her. "Signal processing needs to stabilize." The oscilloscope trace suddenly changed. The chaos didn't disappear, but within it emerged a pattern, a subtle asymmetry in the magnetic field strength between the two detection coils. It was exactly what theory predicted: the electromagnetic wake of a submarine moving through salt water. "Contact," Mary Catherine said quietly. "Bearing 093, range approximately 900 yards. Signal strength indicates submerged target, estimated depth 40 feet, estimated speed 4 knots. Wilkins checked the position data from sonar. The bearing matched within 2 degrees. The range matched within 50 yards. "My God," he whispered, "it actually works." Over the next 6 hours, the S-12 made 17 passes at varying ranges, depths and speeds. The Fisher array detected 15 of them, providing accurate bearing and approximate range even when conventional sonar lost contact. The two failures occurred when the submarine passed directly beneath the Escort, where the array's geometry created a detection blind spot. Detection rate of 88%, Chen calculated, his hands shaking slightly as he wrote the numbers, compared to 11% for conventional magnetic detection in these sea conditions. This isn't an incremental improvement. This is a revolution. By sunset on February 18th, the Eldridge was steaming back to Philadelphia with test data that would change the war. By midnight, Captain Wilkins was on a secure telephone line to Washington, D.C., speaking directly to Admiral Ernest King's staff. By 0600 hours on February 19th, authorization came through for immediate mass production. 150 Fisher arrays to be manufactured within 30 days and installed on every escort destroyer in the Atlantic Fleet. Mary Catherine stood in Machine Shop 7, looking at the production orders, and felt the weight of what she'd started. Somewhere in the Atlantic, convoys were forming for the March crossing. German U-boats were moving into position, confident in their advantage. In 30 days, that advantage would vanish if the production schedule held, if the installations were completed correctly, if the technology worked as reliably in combat as it had in testing. The war hadn't been won, but for the first time in months, it might be possible to stop losing it. March 12, 1943, 0230 hours, North Atlantic, 680 miles east of Newfoundland. Korvettenkapitän Hans Weber stood in the control room of U-523, studying the plot board with the satisfied attention of a predator that had just located prey. 3 days of careful stalking had positioned his submarine perfectly, 4,000 meters ahead of an American convoy designated HX-229, running submerged at periscope depth, waiting for the merchant ships to enter his attack zone. Hydrophones report increased propeller noise bearing 285, the sound operator reported. Multiple contacts, estimated 40-plus vessels. Weber nodded. This was why the U-boat campaign was succeeding. The Americans' predictable convoy routes, their inadequate escort forces, their primitive detection equipment that couldn't locate submarines until after torpedoes were already running. In the past 90 days, Weber had sunk 11 merchant ships totaling 67,000 tons. 2 more successful attacks would earn him the Knight's Cross. All tubes loaded, ready for surface attack, reported the weapons officer. The standard doctrine was simple and had proven devastatingly effective. Surface at night, when visual detection was impossible, close to within 2,500 meters using superior surface speed, fire a spread of torpedoes at the largest targets, dive immediately before escorts could respond. By the time American destroyers reached the attack position, the submarine would be deep and silent, invisible to their crude sonar systems. Periscope depth. Prepare to surface, Weber ordered. U-523 rose smoothly through the dark water, her experienced crew moving through the practiced choreography of a combat surface. The conning tower broke into air at 2247 hours. Weber climbed topside, greeted by freezing wind and the smell of salt. The night was perfect for attack. Overcast sky with no moon, visibility less than 500 meters, moderate seas that would mask the submarine's wake. Through binoculars, he could see the dark shapes of the convoy exactly where expected. 43 merchant ships in 8 columns, plodding eastward at 8 knots, carrying supplies that would never reach Britain. The Escorts, 6 destroyers positioned on the convoy's flanks, were exactly where doctrine predicted, too far away to respond before torpedoes struck home. Target solution computed, the weapons officer called up. 3 merchants in the center column, range 2,100 meters, ready to fire. Weber was about to give the order when something changed. The nearest escort destroyer, positioned 3,000 meters on the convoy's southern flank, suddenly altered course. Not the random zigzag of standard patrol, but a definite turn, directly toward U-523's position. "They can't have seen us," Weber muttered. Visibility was too poor. The submarine's low profile made visual detection impossible at this range in these conditions. But the destroyer was accelerating, her bow wave growing as she increased speed to 25 knots. Her heading wasn't random. She was pointing directly at U-523 as though guided by radio direction finding, but the submarine's radio was silent. Weber had 30 seconds to decide: complete the attack or abort. The destroyer's foredeck lit up with muzzle flashes. Shells screamed overhead, close enough that Weber could feel the pressure wave. They were ranging shots, walking fire toward the submarine's position with impossible accuracy. "Emergency dive, all ahead full," Weber shouted, dropping through the conning tower hatch. The klaxon's harsh blare sent the crew into practiced emergency procedures. U-523 nosed down sharply, her ballast tanks flooding, 740 tons of submarine, seeking the safety of depth. The first depth charge exploded at 0249 hours, close enough to slam the boat sideways. Emergency lighting shattered. Men grabbed for handholds as the deck tilted 20 degrees. The characteristic hammer blow of underwater detonation echoed through the hull, once, twice, 6 times in rapid succession. These weren't the wild, random patterns of depth charges dropped on suspected positions. These were precise, calculated attacks from an escort that somehow knew exactly where U-523 was running. "Damage report," Weber ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Stern diving planes jammed at 15 degrees. Hydraulic leak in the control room. Sonar damaged. No hull breaches. U-523 leveled off at 180 meters, beyond the safe diving depth of 150 meters, her hull groaning under pressure. Above, the destroyer's propeller noise circled like a shark, the high-pitched ping of active sonar searching. But this escort wasn't hunting with sonar alone. Her attack patterns showed knowledge of U-523's position even when the submarine ran silent, even when she changed course, even when she descended beyond sonar range. 3 hours later, U-523 managed to escape by running southeast at dangerous depths, burning precious battery power, finally losing contact when a rain squall disrupted surface conditions. When Weber finally surfaced at dawn, damage assessment showed the submarine needed major repairs. The mission was aborted. No ship sunk, no tonnage added to his tally. Just escape, by the narrowest margin, from an escort that had hunted him with precision that shouldn't have been possible. "They have new detection equipment," Weber reported to U-boat headquarters in Lorient via coded radio. "Extremely accurate, operates in conditions where conventional detection fails. Request immediate tactical assessment." He wasn't alone. Over the next 7 days, U-Boat Command received 15 similar reports from submarine commanders operating in the North Atlantic. The pattern was consistent and terrifying. American escort destroyers were locating submarines with accuracy that German intelligence insisted was impossible. Attack success rates were plummeting. Boats that should have achieved clean kills were being forced to abort missions. Worst of all, the Americans were sinking submarines. U-167 went down on March 15th with all hands, caught by depth charges from USS Bogue's escorts. U-384 was destroyed on March 19th after a surface engagement she should have won. U-665 simply vanished on March 23rd, last reported proceeding to intercept convoy SC-123. By March 25th, 11 U-boats had been destroyed in 18 days, a casualty rate that exceeded anything experienced since the start of the war. At U-boat headquarters in the Château de Pignerol in France, Admiral Karl Dönitz reviewed the reports with growing fury. "The Americans have deployed something new," he told his staff, "some form of detection technology that renders our tactical doctrine obsolete. Our boats are being hunted as though their positions are transmitted by radio beacon." "Could it be radar?" suggested Korvettenkapitän Victor Schütze. "The British have been experimenting with centimeter wavelength systems." "Radar cannot penetrate water," Dönitz snapped. "These attacks are occurring while our boats are submerged. It's something else. Something our intelligence network hasn't identified." In Berlin, the Kriegsmarine's technical staff analyzed captured equipment from sunken British escorts, interrogated prisoners, studied radio intercepts for clues. They found nothing. The American detection system, whatever it was, left no signature that German intelligence could identify. Boats were dying, and no one could explain how the hunters had become the hunted. The statistical reality was undeniable. In February 1943, U-boats had sunk 73 Allied ships totaling 460,000 tons, while losing 19 submarines. In March, with the Fisher arrays operational on 92 American escort destroyers, Allied losses dropped to 56 ships totaling 350,000 tons, while U-boat casualties climbed to 38 boats destroyed. The mathematics of the Atlantic War was shifting. For the first time since 1941, escort forces were killing submarines faster than German shipyards could replace them. On March 31st, Dönitz issued Directive 419 to all U-boat commanders. Enemy detection capabilities have improved significantly. Extreme caution must be exercised when operating near escorted convoys. Submerged attacks from beyond visual range are now mandatory. Surface attacks to be conducted only under optimal conditions with verified absence of escort forces. The directive was an admission that German tactical advantage had evaporated. U-boats were being driven away from convoy routes, forced into defensive postures, hunted by escorts that could find them under conditions that should have provided perfect concealment. The weapon was simple galvanized wire wound into coils and basic signal processing. Built by a farm girl from Nebraska using principles that any electrical engineer could have understood. But timing mattered more than sophistication. The Fisher array had arrived at the exact moment when the Battle of the Atlantic hung in the balance, and it was tipping the scales. July 10th, 1945, 1400 hours. Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, Pennsylvania. The war in Europe had been over for 2 months. The war in the Pacific would end in 5 weeks, though no one standing on Pier 12 knew that yet. What they did know was that 461 escort destroyers had been fitted with Fisher detection arrays, that those arrays had contributed to the destruction of 247 German submarines, and that the Battle of the Atlantic had been won in the spring and summer of 1943 when convoy losses dropped to sustainable levels and U-boat casualties became catastrophic. Mary Catherine Fisher stood beside the USS Eldridge, the first ship to carry her invention into combat, watching workers prepare the vessel for decommissioning. The destroyer Escort had survived the war intact, a minor miracle given that 147 of her sister ships had been sunk. Her service record included 17 confirmed submarine detections, 6 successful depth charge attacks, and 3 verified kills. The Fisher array mounted on her stern was being carefully removed, destined for the Navy Museum in Washington, D.C., as the prototype of technology that had changed naval warfare. "We never gave you proper credit," Captain Wilkins said, joining her at the pier's edge. He was in dress uniform, wearing decorations earned in 4 years of brutal Atlantic combat. The official reports attributed the arrays to Naval Research Laboratory Development Team Alpha. "But your name appears nowhere in the public record." Mary Catherine shrugged, the gesture carrying farm-bred indifference to recognition. "I didn't do it for credit," she said. "I did it because my brother was sailing on merchant ships, and I couldn't stand reading casualty lists, knowing there might be something I could do." Her brother had survived. 3 years on Liberty ships making the Atlantic crossing, transporting the supplies that kept Britain fighting and later supported the invasion of Europe. He'd written her letters from ports in Britain and France, never knowing that his sister's invention was protecting him. The Navy had classified the Fisher array as top secret in March 1943, and the classification hadn't been lifted until May 1945, after Germany's surrender. Commander Morrison had been promoted to captain and commanded an escort squadron in the Pacific, where Fisher arrays proved equally effective against Japanese submarines in the Philippines campaign. Dr. Chen had returned to Caltech with a Navy Cross for technical innovation under combat conditions. Chief Kowalski had retired after 32 years of service, his final assignment supervising production of 723 Fisher arrays in Machine Shop 7. The official history will be written eventually, Wilkins continued. When it is, your contribution will be acknowledged. The statisticians calculate that Fisher arrays saved approximately 380,000 tons of shipping and 4,200 lives in 1943 alone. By preventing those losses, we maintained the supply line to Britain and made Operation Overlord possible. You changed history, Miss Fisher. Mary Catherine looked uncomfortable with the praise. I wound some wire into coils and built a circuit that any radio engineer could have designed, she said. It worked because timing was right, because you gave me resources, because skilled people built it, and brave men used it in combat. I contributed one piece. Thousands of people won the war. But the reality was more nuanced than her modesty suggested. The Fisher array represented something larger than technical innovation. It demonstrated that breakthrough solutions could come from unexpected sources, that a farm girl with practical experience in electronics and a mind trained by years of solving problems with limited resources could see solutions that escaped teams of credentialed experts. It proved that American pragmatism and willingness to try unconventional approaches gave advantages that rigid institutional thinking couldn't match. The German U-boat force had never adapted. Their technical staff had searched for sophisticated Allied detection systems, unable to imagine that the weapon destroying their submarines was based on principles simple enough to sketch on a napkin. By the time German intelligence finally captured a Fisher array from a damaged Escort in October 1943, the technology had been operational for 7 months, and the Battle of the Atlantic was already decided. Post-war interrogations of U-boat commanders revealed the psychological impact. Submarines that had hunted with confidence found themselves hunted. Captains who'd relied on superior tactics discovered that tactics meant nothing when enemy escorts could locate them through conditions that should have provided perfect concealment. The casualty rate had broken their will as surely as depth charges broke their hulls. The final statistics were definitive. In the first 3 months of 1943, before Fisher arrays deployed, U-boats sank 203 Allied ships while losing 56 submarines, an exchange rate of 3.6 merchant ships per U-boat lost. In the 9 months after Fisher arrays became operational, the exchange rate reversed. 298 Allied ships sunk versus 237 U-boats destroyed, an exchange rate of 1.26 ships per submarine. When a military force loses more assets than it destroys, it ceases to be an effective weapon. By January 1944, Admiral Dönitz had effectively abandoned the convoy attack strategy that had nearly won Germany the war. What will you do now? Wilkins asked. The Navy would be pleased to offer you a permanent position with the Naval Research Laboratory. Your security clearances are active, your expertise is valued. I'm going home to Nebraska, Mary Catherine interrupted. My father's running the ranch alone. He needs help, and I miss open sky and cattle that don't explode when you approach them incorrectly. She paused, looking out over the shipyard where thousands of workers were dismantling the machinery of war, transforming destroyer escorts and cargo vessels and repair facilities back toward peacetime purposes. Maybe that's the real lesson, she said quietly. Wars are won by people who come from ordinary places and do extraordinary things because circumstances demand it. When circumstances change, we go back to being ordinary. The wire was just wire. The trick was knowing how to use it. Captain Wilkins watched the young woman who'd changed naval warfare walk away from Pier 12, carrying nothing but the canvas shoulder bag she'd arrived with 2.5 years earlier. The Navy had awarded her $500 in recognition of her contribution, the maximum payment authorized for civilian innovations under wartime regulations. She donated it to the Merchant Marine Relief Fund. 3 decades later, when documents were finally declassified, Historians would identify Mary Catherine Fisher as the inventor of electromagnetic wake detection, a technology that remained classified through the Cold War and evolved into modern magnetic anomaly detection systems still used by naval forces worldwide. Her contribution would be recognized as one of the pivotal innovations that won the Battle of the Atlantic. But in July 1945, she was just a farm girl from Nebraska, heading home to help her father with cattle, carrying wire-working skills and circuit design knowledge back to Broken Bow, where the war had always seemed distant, but the determination to win it had never wavered. The American spirit that had built transcontinental railroads and electrified rural farmland and put radio sets in homes across the Great Plains had faced history's most lethal naval weapon and found a solution in galvanized fence wire and Midwestern pragmatism. 40 German submarines had gone down in 60 days because one person refused to accept that detection was impossible. 4,000 merchant seamen had lived because someone thought about problems differently. The war was won by millions of such contributions, most never recorded, many never recognized. But recorded or not, recognized or not, they'd been enough. The heroes of World War II weren't just soldiers on battlefields, they were ordinary Americans who did extraordinary things when their country needed them. If stories like Mary Catherine's inspire you, hit subscribe to discover more untold histories that changed the world. Drop a comment sharing your own family's war stories. We'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the simplest solutions change everything.